Hi, this is Shauna, the CEO and founder of Fuel Talent. One of the things I have loved most in my 25-year recruiting career has always been the stories that people tell. Stories of leadership, career choices, company ideas, and team building. My inspiration for starting the What Fuels You podcast came from being curious about people's lives and wanting to help share their stories. What path brought them to this place? What decisions did they make that led to failures and successes? Who influenced those decisions, and what lessons were learned along the way? I hope you enjoy the What Fuels You podcast. Today's guest on the What Fuels You podcast is Rob Eleveld. Rob is the CEO of Ekata Inc., where he leads the charge in Ekata's continued growth and global expansion. He previously was the CEO of Whitepages Inc. and has served as the CEO of other Seattle tech firms, including Optify and Vykor. He started his business career in enterprise software sales at Onyx Software Corp and has grown from there. Rob is a proud veteran as an officer in the United States Navy, where he served aboard a fast attack nuclear submarine. He has a BA in engineering sciences from Dartmouth College and an MSE and MBA from Stanford University. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you, Shauna. Happy to be here.
Good to see you. Okay, we're going to start with some rapid fire.
Okay.
I think this is a good question. I was kind of proud of this question. What has prepared you more for your role as a CEO, the Navy or Stanford MBA?
The Navy.
I knew you were going to say that. Everyone I know that has served, and it makes me want to hire vets because I'm like, everyone who has served is such a discipline and rigor. And I want to get into that.
You should want to hire vets.
I do. And I want to talk to you more about it.
Okay.
I really do. It's a huge goal of ours. Okay. What was your favorite thing to eat while you were on the submarine?
I used to bring on cans of tuna fish, and after 3 days at sea, everything fresh is gone. There's no fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, or anything, and you get sick of some of the food there. So I would have cans of tuna fish in my locker. I'd open a can of tuna fish and eat it. No, just a can of tuna fish and water. No mayonnaise or lemon or anything, and that was, it was light, didn't have a lot of fat.
It's very healthy, I have to say, super healthy. But I'm sure your friends on the submarine with you weren't so psyched. That's like bringing it out on.
It does have a smell with it, so you have to get rid of it after that.
I know. Sometimes I bring a hard-boiled egg on the airplane. I'm like, this might not be the right move for the other passengers. Okay, so are you beach or mountains?
I'm a water guy, so a little bit less laying on the beach. But if you had to say, would you rather live near the water or would you rather live near mountains? I grew up in Michigan, near Lake Michigan, and so a big body of water. And now I live out here in Seattle and really like the access to the water all around. I love the mountains out here too. It's a great combination, Seattle. But
Seattle's the best like that, yeah.
Yeah.
I know you're a big traveler. International travel is a big passion of yours. So what's your favorite city you've ever visited?
Wow, that is a good question. I really like London. Tons of museums. I really like the pubs. I like the dark wood pubs and to facilitate talking to people as opposed to blinking lights and so forth. I spent a summer working in Bangkok, Thailand, on the other side of the world, and really enjoyed the Thai culture and food and learning about Southeast Asia.
Right. You Kap Kun Ka.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, those would be a couple that would be high on the list.
Yeah. And okay, so if there was a book that was written about your life, what would it be called?
Well, I say to a lot of people often, enjoy the journey.
I love that. That's a good one. That's a really good one. Okay. Final question. If you could have any superpower, which one would you choose?
I don't spend a lot of time thinking about superpowers. Boy, reading people's minds.
Okay, so you grew up in Michigan.
Yep.
Is that how you identify yourself?
Yep.
Like, is that a big part of your identity?
Still today. I mean, I've lived in Seattle for over 20 years now, but I still think of myself a lot as a Midwesterner. And I have a Michigan baseball cap that I wear a lot, even though I didn't go to school there. I'm a big Michigan fan.
Fantastic school. So what were you into as a kid? Like, what fueled you back then?
For a sport, I played football. I was okay football player on a really good program. My football coach is probably the second most important influence, male influence in my life, besides my dad. I spent a lot of time in the summers in and around Lake Michigan. So I swam, water skied, stuff like that, and just spent time in the open water. And, I skied in the winter. It was cold. It wasn't nearly as good as skiing as here, frankly.
Yeah. But, what lessons did you learn, Rob, from you talked about your football coach? Like that's a big job to be the second top two kind of biggest influence.
Yeah. His name was George Barczewski. Everyone called him Bar. He was very colorful, a different football coach than probably many these days. He taught us to work really hard. He was the winningest football coach in the state of Michigan when I played for him. And, you learn to work really hard. You learn that as hard as you had to practice and be focused, you also had to perform at game time. You learn to rely on the person on your right and left. One of the things I really like about football is you really have to trust your team. There's no one person that can win a football game. And we were in a program where we were expected to win. And so you learn to deal with pressure, and, you don't deal with it perfectly all the time, but you learn to deal with pressure. And, that was helpful.
Yeah. And so, were you a good student? I'm assuming so.
I was a pretty good student. Dartmouth. I worked hard. I was pretty self-motivated to study hard.
Yeah. And who motivated that? Was that kind of a value in your home? Like,
yes, both my parents, my dad was a lawyer. My mom had a master's in social work. They were both academically focused. And I always worked hard at school, even though I already get good grades. Like, even though it was not hard for me, I always worked a little harder than,
That's great. And you've got 3 kids, right?
I've got 3 kids, 15, 17, and 19.
Oh my goodness. Any boys?
2 boys, 2 older boys and a younger daughter. It's great to experience, raising both boys and girls.
And are they football players?
They keep us on our toes. Mm-hmm. The middle one is a football player. And I didn't push them to be football players. I just wanted each of them to have a team sport experience. I thought that was much more important than playing the sport I liked. And he came to football relatively late. He started playing as a sophomore, but he really enjoys it. So it makes me happy. But my older son really loved ultimate Frisbee and was probably going to play that in college. And my daughter really likes lacrosse. She also swims competitively. So
we're a big lacrosse family. I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a great sport. I've learned a lot just watching her and her coaches and so forth. So
well, my son plays lacrosse and was playing football, and I kind of became the wimpy mom who made him quit football. And he's not thrilled. So I'm always asking smarter people than I am, like, so football, and it sounds like you're on board. It's gotten so crazy these days.
Yeah. I don't know. It's one of those things where I played, there's always some risk to anything you do.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So you've got I read that you have a high school teacher who inspired you to pursue engineering because he was coding at the time.
I had a high school teacher who was, I was lucky to have a couple of really good high school teachers, but one of them was Mr. Kemp. He was we didn't really call it computer science at the time, but he was the teacher that taught me how to code. And so when I went off to college, I took a couple of coding classes, but I really kind of got burned out on software, honestly. But the first person I met in college, the first RA, was an engineering major, and I spent a night with them, and because I didn't have a room yet. And he's like, you should think about being an engines major. At Dartmouth, it was called an engines. You think about being, that was the short for it. You should be an engines major.
Engines.
So I just signed up for a bunch of prereqs, math and physics prereqs. And, next thing I know, I'm 2 years into this thing, buried in thermodynamics classes or whatever. And so it wasn't like there was a huge thought process around it. Just sort of happened.
Yeah. I actually love that part of the podcast and just general conversations I have with people the most when like their life is determined by or dictated by kind of a haphazard way of kind of going into something like, I don't know, my friend did it. So I showed up one day and next thing you know, like, and then it's great. It's like, it's good for our kids to hear this too, because they're kind of over-programmed, overthinking and over-orchestrated. So it's great. So you chose Dartmouth. Was that, like who was guiding you through this whole process? Such a great school.
My dad was an alum and I'd always wanted to go there and I didn't apply anywhere else. I didn't have a plan B. My plan B was probably to apply to University of Michigan. I had never visited any colleges, none of the stuff that you do a lot of today. I used to watch the football scores come in with my dad and I always kind of wanted to go there and I was lucky enough to apply and get in.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so have you stayed in touch with some of your college friends? I know we talked about Brent Fry.
Yeah.
Is that your crew? Is that your kind of like core kind of in your wedding type of people?
You know, I've got a core group of 10, 12 college friends I do a pretty good job of keeping in touch with. I feel lucky and blessed. I've got, about that same number of high school friends, and I've got a couple friends from the Navy and I've got a couple friends from grad school too. So you read a lot. I'm now scarily over 50. I'm not going to tell you how far over 50 I am.
I already know because I did your research.
Anyway, so, you read all these things about, men and their, age 50 or whatever, midlife and how hard it is to make friends for men specifically. And I've been really lucky to have a good core group of friends from a couple different phases of my life.
Yeah. And so how have those friendships coming out of such a great school and then obviously Stanford MBA impacted, your life and also your career? Like, I guess the value of a network and of relationships.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Brent. I mean, I'm in Seattle because Brent Fry, he recruited me to a startup he was running. It wasn't a startup anymore by the time I went. It was about 120 people when I started working for Onyx. I talked my way. He recruited me to a marketing role for a summer as an internship. And then I sort of realized at the time that the marketing team didn't really know what was going on. And I was always asking the salespeople what was going on. So I figured the salespeople were the only ones that were touching the customers and really knew what was going on. So I talked myself into an entry-level sales position for Onyx down in the Bay Area. And I was probably the lowest paid person graduating from my business school class. Honestly, I'm not kidding. I was an entry-level sales position. The fact that I had a graduate degree didn't matter at all. The fact that I was an engineer didn't matter at all. All that mattered is could I make my number selling or not? And so, and things went, I had a couple deals go my way the first quarter and kind of grew from there and ended up doing okay as a salesperson, enterprise salesperson.
That's awesome. That's a tough job, I gotta say. And so when you say you were the lowest paid, wasn't there a recruiting on campus that you were looking into? Like, how come you didn't pursue something, right away?
That's a good question. I had seen one of the cool things about business schools. We had a ton of speakers come, and a number of the executives and CEOs that came and talked started in sales. And they usually either started in sales or they started in product or engineering. And I felt like there were kind of three areas to get some core knowledge. One would be sales, another one would be finance, or the third would be sort of engineering, coding, that sort of thing. And I was kind of, I was 30 coming out of business school or something like that. I was kind of past the fact of starting to be a coder at that point. I've been in the Navy and I managed a lot of people and made life and death decisions on a day-to-day basis for a while. And then finance was something where I was more interested in the market and the customers. And so, but I knew that sales was one of those things that you couldn't sort of fake it. You either had to sort of roll up your sleeves and be a professional salesperson for a while or not. And you kind of got to pay your dues in sales.
Yeah. And it's measurable. It's like either you're successful or you're not. Like the numbers don't lie for sure. So who recruited you into the Navy? What an interesting decision. Like, how did that come to be? Was your dad in the Navy?
My parents were not in the Navy or the military. My dad was not. He was a JAG officer, legal officer for an Air Force Reserve, just because back then there was a draft and everyone had to do something. So, but I I spent a quarter in a language study abroad in Germany in college, and I traveled with some friends of mine before that. And one of the places I went was the Normandy beaches. And I don't know if you've ever seen Saving Private Ryan, but there's a beginning scene where the kind of the one of the main characters is walking along, 30 40 years later. At the American Military Cemetery there. And I literally, when I saw that movie, came out in 1995, I'd done that walk 7 or 8 years before in 1987. And I knew exactly where it was. And you sort of stood there and you look out on this beach. It's 3/4 of a mile of beach flat on this big bluff that's 100 feet up. And you stand there and say, gosh, the only way to take this beach is to send so many people running up that the Germans couldn't shoot them all. Literally, it's a shooting gallery. And so I remember my hands were shaking, and I just decided that I should do something in my generation to serve my time, give something back for all the people that did that. So
Wow.
very self-motivated. And it took me like kind of a year to sort of decide after I stood there, maybe half a year to a year. I kind of looked around for a program, and then I applied to the Navy.
And was that scary? Like, especially it sounds like you didn't have family or friends who served before you. And so was that something you went into kind of scared? I guess
you wrestle it with it a little bit. You take an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And what you're really deciding is what's worth dying for.
Right.
And so you wrestle with your own mortality at age 20, taking that oath. So at least I did. And so I didn't do it overnight, and I didn't do it on a whim, but I never had any regrets either. And I was always very proud to serve. And it was hard. It was hard.
So what was the scariest thing that you experienced?
Aboard a submarine, there are two things that are very scary. One's a fire and the other's flooding. And at some level, I experienced both of those. But I did experience both of them. But flooding was a little bit less so. But it's a little bit of a hard to describe. But when you're submerged, there's a bunch of air regeneration systems actually that were developed by NASA. And so, because you're sort of fine tuning how much oxygen and CO2 is in the air because you're breathing it, it's got to be replenished and so forth. And there's a lot of fans blowing to move the air around. And so you can smell a change in the air very quickly. You can smell smoke very quickly. And it was about midnight, and I was in a t-shirt and shorts, and I had just gotten finished. It was in the engine room. I had just gotten finished doing a workout. We used to do pull-ups near the main engines, and it was always hot back there, and you do push-ups on the deck plates. And there was a guy on watch, and I was about 20 feet from him. He was another officer like I was, and I was about to go to bed. And I looked at him, and our eyes met, and we smelled smoke at the same time. And I ran aft. He was on watch, so he went in, called away a fire alarm. There's about 100 feet I ran. It was one of those things where you'd been on so long, I knew where to duck. I covered that ground so fast, dropped down to lower level, ran forward. I ran into him coming forward, and I knocked him over because we were both coming through the same hatch. I got in this room. I said, "It's here. It's engine room lower level." There was smoke everywhere. We had people pouring down. We were all taught to attack a fire. And there was smoke everywhere, and you couldn't figure out where it was coming from. And so I immediately, this Mr. Eleveld, I'm man in charge in engine room lower level. And I had machinist mates that used to report to me, and I was telling them I thought that there was some oil spraying somewhere that was smoking. We didn't want it to fire. If oil lights, it's really hard to get out. And so I had all sorts of people around me. And then basically this this big lube oil pump that was sort of like bigger than I am, shot a big fireball out. And
oh my God.
and it was short circuiting. And this guy named Petty Officer Miller, who was an electrician's mate, big guy, bigger than me, probably 220 pounds, elbowed me out of the way and sprayed that thing down with a CO2 extinguisher. And anyway, we got it out, and there was smoke everywhere, and so yeah, you have a lot of paperwork to do, and so forth. And 4 hours later, we were finishing up the paperwork. Everybody in the boat was awake. It's like 4 a.m, and the captain had interviewed both of us and stuff like that. So Miller comes up to me and he goes, "Hey, Mr. E, hold out your hand." They just call me Mr. E. "Hold out your hand." So I held out my hand, and my hand, 4 hours later, my hand's shaking. He held out his hand was shaking.
Well, how could it not be? I'm shaking just listening to this story. Is there, I guess, meditation or some sort of way to calm your energy? Because I get claustrophobic thinking about it. I guess you can't really have that.
You don't really have that. You're sort of trained to deal with, there's a lot of expectations. There's, a couple of years of training before you get on your boat. Certainly there were a few people that ultimately, sort of exited the boat, put up their hands, said, "I can't take it. I'm leaving."
Yeah.
Because it was all volunteer on purpose. You didn't want someone down there who didn't want to be.
So what was the longest period of time that you were on the submarine without coming up?
6 weeks. And, a long time to be submerged. But I'll tell you today, I've actually got a friend from Dartmouth who is the CFO of a company that operates liquefied natural gas ships around the world. And they've got all sorts of crews that literally can't come ashore right now. So they've got crews that have been on their ships for 6 months or a year, not being able to come to shore because all these countries won't let them. They don't want anybody spreading COVID. It's terrible. So my 6 weeks isn't that long in the scheme of things right now.
Well, it's all hindsight's 2020, of course. So you did this whole crazy experience in the Navy, and when you ended that, is that when you went and got your MBA at Stanford?
Yeah, I applied to a dual master's and business master's course. Yeah.
Was that kind of one of those things that you felt you needed in order to have success in the business world?
It was a good transition time, number one. Number two is I sort of had wanted to go to graduate school, and the Navy's very focused. And it was nice to have to be able to go back to an academic experience. I don't think I would have appreciated it very much coming right out of college. I had some friends that went straight into law school or something. They didn't really want to be in law school. They didn't really think about it. It's just like they were kind of programmed to keep doing something. And so I always counsel to take a year or a couple of years before you go back to grad school, just because you'll appreciate it more and you'll know a little bit more what you want to do and that sort of thing.
I've heard that wisdom dropped by several people that have said, just take a little break, make sure that that's what you want to do. What's your take on like an MBA versus no MBA?
I think real world experience is far more important, to be super clear. And, we spend a lot of time training our people, and I give them a lot of the wisdom I've got from a little bit of MBA and a lot of real world experience. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think, what any school experience does is it gives you a little bit of a broader range of information, but it doesn't take it down to something tangible very well, right? And so what's tangible is when you're working. And what was helpful for me for an MBA is coming out of the Navy. I had sort of no exposure to business at all, and so it was more the whole experience of meeting people and seeing speakers and taking classes, as opposed to any one thing, and just allow me a little bit of time to think about where to start somewhere.
Yeah. So what launched your career? Like you said that you didn't have a lot of exposure, and then you launched this crazy successful, awesome. I'm sure you've had some peaks and valleys, but career in tech.
Well, I thought I was going to go back to Michigan, and sort of I applied to this dual master's program that was engineering and business. And it was specifically designed around manufacturing, sort of, building manufacturing leaders and to keep manufacturing in the U.S. And I got to the West Coast. I actually met my wife on the West Coast. I'm not sure she was thrilled to go out to Michigan. I really didn't ask her. I mean, we did, but met my wife at graduate school, and she was in my class. But you're at Stanford. This was the late '90s. Tech was all around us, and then Brent. And I took one summer and did an internship in Thailand just to check out Southeast Asia and travel a little bit. And then I had this second summer because I was doing 2 masters, and Brent asked me to, recruited me up to do a marketing internship. And then I ended up staying for a couple of years and learning about tech and specifically B2B software. I mean, if you really want to be specific about it, I'm not a consumer guy, really. I'm a B2B person, right? Business to business. And so I kind of started there with sales and learned a lot about how to work with customers and what selling is about, not used car selling, but selling and guiding people on decisions. You can't make the decision for them, but you can influence them and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And so, so all of these experiences, I mean, I guess out of all of them within your career, where did you learn the most as far as preparing you for your role at Whitepages and then ultimately Ekata?
So after Onyx, I wrote a business plan and started a company. I co-founded a company. I recruited a executive out of Boeing as a co-founder. I got introduced to him through a Navy buddy of mine who worked for him. And that was how I got to Seattle. I wrote this business plan, and it was focused on the heavy manufacturing supply chain, which I'd studied some of at Stanford. And it was really software as a service before its time. I was a big believer in software as a service because I'd sold enterprise software. And there were just some real disincentives with the customer base with enterprise software. I could talk about if you want, but I was a big believer in software as a service. It was much more transparent. You had to earn your way every month with the customer. I co-founded this company. We licensed some technology out of Boeing. It wasn't really, the technology wasn't worth very much, but it was worth not having Boeing trying to sue us because we recruited some people out of there.
Right.
And I ran it for 6 years. And it was incredibly hard. It was, I founded that company after the tech bubble burst. The tech bubble burst in like March 2000. The first money I raised for the company was sort of angel investors and friends and family. And that was in, mid 2000. The first venture round I raised was in 2001. The venture capital industry had never gone through a downturn. That point, really, the modern venture capital industry. Right. And they were in a bunker, I can tell you. No one knew what to do. And the hardest thing I ever did was raise a Series A round in 2001, $6 million round. And I ran it for 6 years. And, we sold to Boeing and Lockheed and GE aircraft engines. I mean, these are extraordinarily hard customers to deal with. We were a little 30-person company. And everything we did, we were sailing upwind against a freaking gale force wind. I mean, everything we did was a push. And ultimately it didn't work. It failed. And it wasn't like, oh, we sold it and, it wasn't great, but we sold it. Like, a lot of people say, oh, we sold this or we got this, or, a lot of people say like, oh, we had fun. We're having fun. It was not fun. It was a freaking grind every day. And people would ask me, what's like being a CEO? And, I was in my mid 30s at the time. I said, you know what the CEO is? Taking bad news every day and not showing how bad it hurts. That's what being a CEO is about, because you just can't panic. And I learned in the Navy, never panic, never, ever, ever panic. You got to keep thinking about what you're going to do. And so, but anyway, I learned a ton. And like of the stuff that I'm dealing with today at Ekata, most of the lessons, not all of them, but most of the hard lessons I learned in 6 years trying to sort of carry that business Vykor on my shoulders. And some of the things I learned is I shouldn't try and carry it all on my shoulders, right? I need to rely on a team, but also hold a team accountable. And
is that, I mean, not to be like deep shrinky, but I'm just curious, is that like trust issues or problems delegating or like control issues? Like we all have I'm actually like love to delegate, but I know that I do talk to a lot of people who have trouble letting go. They want to touch everything.
Leadership was always something that was sort of, I felt was important, and I put a lot of time and effort into. I had done all the research on this business. I had led the first customer efforts. I actually recruited someone out of Boeing, but he was barred from selling to Boeing for a year. I mean, you can imagine why. They had a rule that once you'd left, you couldn't literally enter the property for a year. So, the first customer was Boeing. Who sold it? Me. It was like 34 years old, had no experience in aerospace, but I had to sell that deal. Lockheed was our second customer. Who sold Lockheed? Me. So I started to know these accounts better than anybody else.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the challenge was, to cut to the chase, one of the things that's important especially when you're small, but anytime, is you need one or more thought partners, and you can call them business partners, but I mean, you should really think of them as thought partners more than anything else. And, Vykor, I had at various times in that company's evolution, 3 different ones. But the last 2 years, I had my thought partner was our chief operating officer, Carla Corcoran. And she's great. She's been a CEO here in town, super person, and now leads a couple of Vistage CEO groups and is a CEO coach and a good friend of mine. But at the time, she said to me, Rob, every time someone comes to you with something, you're super quick. I'm not like you, Rob. I can't process things really quickly. I got to like sort of sleep on them for a night, but you're super fast. So someone comes out of a meeting, a customer meeting or something, sends an update or talks on the phone, you got an idea what to do all the time. And the problem with you having an idea and processing really quickly is it doesn't give them time to think about what to do. And so what I do is I just ask them, hey, what do you think we should do? Because then, you train them.
You're getting all the best thinking. Yeah,
exactly. You train them to bring you, solutions, not problems. And I sat there, I replayed that in my mind, like for a week.
You're like, this is such an aha moment.
Because I was like, every problem I've had for the past 4 years is in partly self-induced, because, whenever there was a problem, it was kind of like, I'll shoulder it. I'll take it. Yeah, and in reality, what I should have been doing is saying, hey, what would you do? And why don't you take it? And so we have very specific training at Ekata that I tell all the new line managers. The first question you should be asking everybody that reports to you when they bring you something is, what do you think we should do? Because for 2 reasons. One is it trains them all that they need to bring you solutions, not problems, because anybody can point out a problem. That's not terribly helpful, right? Finding a solution to a problem, that's super helpful. But secondly, usually what we should do on any given thing is a little bit gray. It's not like this is for sure the right way to turn. We could go this way, we could go this way. And if someone comes to you and says, hey, Rob, I think we should go this way, unless I've seen that movie and I know it ends in just blood and gore and tears, we should definitely just let them do that, even though I might think it might be a better idea to go here.
Yeah.
Why? Because most of what makes the decision of which way to go successful is how committed the implementation is. And that person who's got to go execute it, if it's their idea, they are going to be so much more motivated to make it work. And they're going to put so much more emphasis into it. And by the way, it's gray which way would have worked anyway. So let them do that. It empowers them and it keeps them more engaged. And even if it doesn't work, guess what? They learned. Because heaven knows every learning I have is from a mistake I made. And believe me, I've made a longer list than most people.
They do say you learn the most from your mistakes. Yeah. So my question to you is, looks like you took the job as VP of sales at Whitepages when you had been on this CEO, C-suite, almost all of your career. How did you know that? How did your ego allow you to say, no problem? I'm asking from a recruiter's perspective, because sometimes candidates come in and they're very limited by title.
Well, number one, I'd already made that mistake. So after I shut Vykor down, I was kind of like, I had felt like I'd learned a lot of hard lessons, and I sort of was just in a bad market. I picked a bad market, and I really felt like I wanted to be CEO again, and I basically should have just backed off that ego, and I would have made a better choice, but I didn't, and so I was CEO again. But it was anyway. If I had just been more flexible, I probably would have ended up with a better experience somewhere else, honestly, that second one after Vykor. But, by the time I was recruited, there was a recruiting agency of, Spencer Stewart retained search, and they approached me, and I met Alex Elgard, who was at the time CEO of Whitepages, now chairman of Whitepages and Ekata. So my boss still, but at the time he was CEO of Whitepages, and he was starting this little business unit. Well, it was there, but it was a little tiny 10-person business unit called Whitepages Pro. And he wanted a VP of sales. And I came in and I talked to him. And I talked to a lot of other people, and they tried to hire this role once or twice before, and it hadn't worked out. So I went through an immense number of interview loops, 5 or 6. I talked to, 30 people. And I had I got to know Alex. It was over a period of time. I was kind of exiting a different company. I was selling some assets of a different company I'd been parachuted into. We tried to turn it around. It just didn't really quite work. And I was doing some consulting. I wasn't in a big rush to find something new. And I got to know Alex, and he really felt like he's an entrepreneur's entrepreneur, and he's started 3 businesses. He's like Brent, there's relatively few in Seattle that have started more than one business. So Alex is the CEO of Hiya. He started Whitepages. Now Lee McMillan runs Whitepages, who great CEO. And I run Ekata, which was spun out of Whitepages. And so but Alex Elgard's an entrepreneur's entrepreneur, and he really felt like, hey, we got all these leads. If we just had a VP of sales, it would sort of sort itself out.
Kind of like the CEO of the business, but through the sales perspective.
Yeah, and I said to Alex, I said, if you really want this business unit to grow, you're going to need a general manager. It's more than just closing deals. I can just tell you, it's a bigger effort than that from a go-to-market standpoint. But so we basically kind of came to an agreement that it wasn't my sort of career objective to go be a VP of sales, because I could do that at bigger companies than this one, right? If that was. So we just kind of had a handshake that was like, look, I'll be your VP of sales for a year, and I'll effectively do the general manager role of this business unit on the side. And if in a year's time, you don't feel like this business unit needs a GM, or I'm not it, either one of those, it's fine, no harm, no foul, but I'll leave. And but if you do want me to stay, I'm going to be I think it's going to warrant being a GM here. So that was the agreement we had, and we, I executed the VP of sales role, and he executed on the agreement we had given my performance. And so it worked out fine.
That's awesome. That's great. So how come they needed to spin out Ekata instead of just keeping it like Whitepages Pro, like a product within?
Well, it was a progression of things. In 2016, we spun out this business unit. It's now Hiya, basically because Samsung came, and Hiya has a real focus on mobile phone numbers. And it's, I won't go into that, but Alex was moving to London with his family for a couple of years. He wanted to be the CEO of Hiya. And so he asked me to be the CEO of Whitepages, which after we spun out Hiya was Whitepages, the consumer business, the traditional whitepages.com that he had founded in 1997, and Whitepages Pro, the B2B business, the API focused business. And so, and I was the GM of Whitepages Pro. So at the time, in mid 2016, we spun out Hiya, and I assumed the position of a CEO of Whitepages and ran those 2 business units. And over 6 months or something, I recruited in Lee McMillan initially as the VP of marketing for Whitepages consumer business, and then promoted her to GM. And then in late 2018, early 2019, Whitepages Pro was global. We were just opening an office in Amsterdam. We had a bunch of global customers. It was more of a global focused business. And it was growing at a 50% rate. It was a pretty aggressive growth business. And Whitepages Consumer was growing sort of mid-teens. It was super profitable. It was more US focused, and sort of the strategies were not as aligned as they were previously. And so it was just an agreement at the board level that we should separate those two businesses. And Lee would be the CEO of Whitepages and I would be the CEO of Ekata. So that's what we did.
That's great. And so for our listeners who don't know Ekata, what does Ekata do?
Ekata provides identity verification data to e-commerce merchants and payment providers and financial services companies to basically identify, is this Rob Eleveld online on my website, either trying to make a transaction or applying for a loan or a new bank account or something? Mm-hmm. Or is this someone with some of Rob Eleveld's information? Maybe they purchased my credit card on the dark web with my address and my name associated with it, but they don't have my mobile phone number, or they don't have my email address. So they've got some pieces of my identity, but not all of them.
Yeah.
And does this look like a real person doing a legit transaction, or is this someone who's got some bad intent or is a fraudster that's impersonating Rob Eleveld?
Yeah.
So that's what all of our customers are trying to decide. And we provide data around names, addresses, phone numbers, emails, and IP addresses that help paint a picture of whether this looks like enough data that makes sense together that's Rob Eleveld. There's other things out there that we don't do. We don't have social security numbers or things associated with credit risk like the credit bureaus do. And we don't have device IDs like, something that's on your browser on your mobile phone that says you've used this before, or things like that.
Yeah. So what is the business model as far as how you make money, and how has that, how has your business been impacted through COVID?
Well, we license our data products. Our data products, about 80% of our revenue is API-driven, application programming interface. So if someone's directly connecting to pull data on a transaction-by-transaction basis. 20%, we also have a web portal. So 20% of our customers are using some of our data through a web portal for what's called manual review, where I'm actually looking at one particular transaction, trying to decide for some reason, is this fraudulent or good? But most of our data is used in rules platforms, or in machine learning models that basically come up with a decision on whether this is good or bad. And we charge on a per query basis. So every time someone pings our API, we charge anywhere from 20 cents a query on down, depending on volume and commitment. We do a lot of data testing with product managers. Our customers at the business contact level are usually product managers or data scientists around the world. So we work with Amazon and Apple and big e-commerce companies, Walmart. Yeah. We work with Stripe and Adyen and big
impressive
payment companies, and so around the world.
Yeah. And so how has this past year been during the pandemic?
Well, we feel really lucky. A part of our business was impacted because we also serve the travel industry. So, Expedia, Booking.com, a number of airlines, our customers are, that was way down. It's coming back now. But we have e-commerce really took off, as more and more people are in their homes. Instead of going retail shopping at the mall, they're doing things online. So our top line revenue, we were about 10% behind plan last year. We had a 50% growth target. Wasn't quite 50%, but in the pandemic, the growth we had was, I feel really good about. But we also pulled back a little bit on our hiring because we were unsure how our customer base would do. I'd managed more tenuous companies through both the 2001 downturn, as I mentioned, and also 2008. And so we were conservative on our hiring. And so we were super profitable last year. Like, it's the only time in my entire career where we were too profitable and my board was pushing me to invest more.
Yeah.
Do
something. Yeah.
Always something. So anyway, we're hiring aggressively. We feel really good. We opened an office in Singapore last year. Yeah. We've got, 200 people, 70 of them are in either Budapest, Amsterdam, or Singapore. So we're managing a big distributed global business, and it's fun.
Yeah, I know. It's incredible. And so tell me, you said you're growing. Tell me about why Ekata, if somebody is listening and potentially wants to apply for a job.
Well, we have 7 operating imperatives on our website, and we wrote those when we separated from Whitepages, but a number of them were kind of how we operated before, which is why we call them operating imperatives. We did a look at values around different companies, and if you did a Venn diagram mix of all of the values of tech companies in the area or in San Francisco, like 70% of them are the same 5 things. So we didn't want to do that. We did something separate, different. So we have 7 operating imperatives. I'll call out a couple of them. One is we build enduring customer relationships. And so we touch the customer. It's very unique for us to be shut in our houses, but we travel. Our product managers go out and meet customers. Our product marketers go out and meet customers. We travel to see customers. We travel around our various offices around the world to be work together in cross-functional teams. So we're very focused on being out there in the market and touching the market. And that's if you've been in B2B for a while, there's a lot of companies where no one ever touches a customer, and they're just sort of in this bureaucracy, and we're not that. So that's one thing. We really center around the market and the customers. I talked about this idea of what do you think we should do? That's embedded in our operating imperatives in 2 things. One of our operating imperatives is bring a point of view. So we ask everybody, like, hey, if you got an idea, bring it, bring a point of view. Don't just sit there and be passive. And that's really encouraged our company. And then the other one is the other operating imperative is called push accountability to the edge. The edge is very, it's kind of a little bit of a software term, okay, edge servers and so forth. But people ask me where the edge is, and I say, well, the edge is a lot of places, but there's one place the edge is not. It's not my desk, okay? It's way far away from my desk because I don't have enough context to make the decisions. We want people making decisions out there when they're in a customer meeting. We want people empowered. We want product managers to make a decision real time in a stand-up on a Tuesday morning with 4 software engineers on the daily stand-ups. So we really focus on empowering people to make decisions at the edge. And we understand they're going to make mistakes. So we try and create what I call operating envelopes so that a mistake isn't catastrophic in one way or another. And so we don't set them up for failure by just saying, hey, go do it. But we really do focus on engaging people and empowering people that way. And we focus on trust and transparency. That's another operating imperative. So.
Yeah, I love those. And so as you're scaling this year and we're in a global pandemic, are you guys still 100% remote? And if so, how has that, impacted your recruiting strategy?
We've added 30% of our workforce since the pandemic started, and I worry about it every day. Yeah. Every day.
Well, that's what makes you a great leader, Rob. It's good that you're worrying about this. CEOs who are not worried about their culture, especially if you're the type who's like, you want them to know your people.
It's hard. It's hard to transfer that culture on a virtual basis when you can't touch people and meet people. I was talking to I've got a great chief of staff. We have an 18-month chief of staff rotation that works for me, and we pick out people that are high performers, and then we put them back in the company, the Google goal. And so I've got a great chief of staff. Her name's Stacy Gillenase. And I was talking to her about it today. And I was saying, like, every experience I have, if you let the culture just sort of organically evolve, it goes a bad way somehow. You've got to be very intentional about the culture, and you still can't control everything, right? But you can be intentional about it. And so we're trying to be intentional about the culture, even during the pandemic. I'm sure we will be making mistakes along the way and already have made some, but we are going to go back to the office. And the end state is still to operate like we did before the pandemic at the end state. Whether that end state is, I don't quite know. It's probably sometime Q4 or something.
Yeah.
In between now and then, it's a very flabby muscle going back to the office. So we're going to have to develop that muscle over time and, go in once or twice a week and have reasons to go in. I had a friend of mine, I swim on a master's team, and One of my friends swam for Stanford, and she's a coach now in the area. And we were talking about, the vaccines rolling out, and it's the days are getting longer and there's sunshine. And she said, "We're getting there, Rob." And I thought to myself, yeah, we're getting there. A year later, we're getting there. That's kind of a great little microcosm of my mindset right now. We're getting there.
Where do you swim?
I swim with the Masters team at Sandpoint Country Club, and then
you're in Seattle.
and then I swim in the Swim Across America open water swim event every year, and we do some open water swimming in Lake Washington too.
You're hardcore. You're a whole nother level. And so we talked about why Ekata, but what about I guess what attributes are you looking for as far as someone who makes a great culture ad for Ekata?
We look for people with intellectual curiosity because, tech changes so fast. Our business has changed so much since I started there in 2013 to where we are today. And people that are intellectually curious, number one, they bring a point of view. They think about stuff. They don't just sort of do what you tell them all the time. Sometimes that drives me berserk, but most of the time, they're trying to think hard about, hey, is there a different way we could be doing this better? And that's what we want.
Yeah.
And so intellectual curiosity is an important one. They've got to have a level of aptitude for a technical product. It's quite a technical product that we sell.
Yes, it is.
Data is hard for a lot of people to grasp, and an API is very intangible relative to I've sold, basically, something on a screen before where you can actually see it.
Yeah.
So those are pieces of it. And then, we want people that are motivated to do right by the customer, and that fuels them, to the point of this podcast. And you can figure that out pretty quickly with most people, what they're driven by and what motivates them. And then our one of our operating imperatives is embrace the grind. And that is more, it's not like we grind every day. It's more like everything that's worth doing is hard and takes time.
And that's okay.
And it's okay. And so if you just embrace that and say it's hard and it's going to take time, but we're going to get there, we're getting there, back to Susan, we're getting there. That's what I believe, and that's what the team believes in. So we work along every day, and we try and do a little better every day, 1% better every day.
That's great. And so what are your big picture plans or goals for the company, 3-5 years from now?
Well, we're really focused today at 200 people and, about 75 million in revenue run rate to be a $200 million, 600 person business, even more globally distributed than we are today, in about 3 years time. And we got a pretty good plan to get there. We got a lot of execution between now and then. But, unfortunately for the world, online fraud and cyber theft is growing and massively.
Massively, right? It's like
it's
a huge
sponsored. It's very low risk. You can sit behind a server farm in Russia, and there's no risk the FBI is ever going to break down your door or whatever. The way I say it is, your worst week, you can work a lot of long hours and drink a lot of coffee and not break in somewhere. That's your worst week, and then at times you're going to, figure out that, like my ID and my identity and 86,000 other Washingtonians were stolen from the Employment Security Department, right?
Yeah.
And all that money got funneled over to some Nigerian fraud ring, and it didn't go to the people that needed it for unemployment. And so that's what's going on today in fraud. It is a global market. I really look at it like the financial market, except it's an illegal instead of a legal market. But the financial markets focus on arbitrage opportunities where there's high reward for less risk. The risk reward trade-off is enough that you can make a lot of money fast. And fraud right now is just probing out there. Anywhere in the world where there's a weak point, where there's an arbitrage opportunity to make a lot of money fast, and then the screws get tightened down, the security gets tightened down, and they move to the next weak point. And it is a global market. And so we're trying to support our customers globally to defend against that.
Yeah. Well, you're doing it. And I'm sure that they're all super grateful, because imagine, what else are you going to do? You have to partner with a company like yours. We all do. I wish there was something. We're not selling products necessarily. We're not e-commerce, but I always get scared of that constantly, of getting
hacked into
of
and
getting hacked into. I'm like, that's super scary. Okay. So you're doing your swimming, you're running your company, you've got your 3 kids, you've got your dog Indigo, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Are you proud of me? I did my research.
You really did your research. Amazing. Yes.
So how do you set yourself up for, a balanced life, a good week, kind of a week where you look back and go, I feel like I'm kind of I like to say like on my feet, not on my toes and not on my heels. Like
that's a good way to say it. I try and take a little quiet time in the morning. I really like walking the dog in the morning and just breathing the air, saying a prayer, just, being out and kind of happy with the day, so that whether it's raining or shining, I try and go for a walk in the morning. It's not a long walk, but it's 20 minutes or something to get centered a little bit. Boy, I do my best to, make sure I'm there time wise for when my kids want me to be there. Kids, as they get older, they don't need as much of your time, but you got to be available for them when they're ready, because they're not ready very often. And so I sort of put stuff away if they want to do something as silly as watch a TV show with me, or my daughter's learning to drive right now. So when she says she wants to drive, we're driving. Like there's nothing that's going to get in the way of that. So try and do a little bit of that. My wife and I do our best to get away once or twice a year. Just enjoy the small things. I do my best to take joy out of small things and not big things. And so that's why the book name was Enjoy the Journey.
Yeah. I like it. Well, as we get older, and I'm hitting 50 this year, so I get it. We're actually very close in age. It's true that you do start to appreciate the little things more and try to remind yourself. You have so much more perspective. You're like, don't sweat the small stuff. So what is your ultimate fuel?
My ultimate fuel. My ultimate fuel at this point is teaching other people a little bit of what I've learned. And today I do that at work. I try and do that a little bit with my kids, but frankly, they don't have a lot of time for getting wisdom from their dad. I get a lot of energy out of the people I work with, the team I work with, growing their careers. I've raised I've promoted a lot of them from within. I've got a really motivated team, very talented, and I've taught them a lot, I think. And whether it's here or wherever else over, the coming, hopefully I'll be around a little bit longer. I'll be trying to do that somewhere, I guess is what I would say.
Thank you for listening to the What Fuels You podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, and follow us on social media to keep up with the latest news and episodes. You can also contact us at podcast@fueltalent.com to provide feedback, ask questions, and share topics or guests you would like us to cover in the future. We hope you feel inspired by our guests and that we have helped fuel your day. Join us next time for another episode of What Fuels You.